I forgot to record last week, so I'm just going to record now. If you don't want, unfortunately with this recording, it's going to record everything. So if you don't want to be seen, just shut off your camera, okay? Otherwise you may be recorded. But you can still keep your mic open if you will. So yeah, so those activities that create suffering present and also in the future. That's quite an obvious one. How about the second one? Path that leads to suffering in the present life, but happiness in future lives. How about anybody? Charlene, you want to give an example of that?
Oh, I came to my mind just exercising or like eating well. So you suffer a little now, but hopefully you'll live longer and healthy.
Right. So the old adage is no pain, no gain, right? So exactly, exercise, which I think I could use more of personally, but yes, you're right. Yeah, suffering present, but in the future brings you happiness, right? So then the next one here is path that leads to happiness in the present life, but to suffering in the future lives. How about an example of that?
Overindulging in good food.
Overindulging in good food, yes. So addiction also, and unfortunately, the addiction for the 21st century is said to be sugar in North America. So that's why diabetes is going through the roof. It's because we're all addicted to sugar, and we all want it, more and more of it, and of course that creates suffering in the end. So yes, thank you. And then finally, what then do you think could create happiness both present as well in the future?
Meditation.
Meditation, yes. So from a Buddhist perspective, according to the Buddha, is to follow the Dharma. If you follow the teachings, then you will find peace in the present as well in the future. Okay. So as you can see, if we examine the text in this way, we can see how it's very applicable to our present life, right? So this is not just something that happened 2,500 years ago, but it is in fact very much important for us here right now. So when we listen to the teachings, when we read the text, this is something that we have to do in order for it to make sense to us, is we have to put it into context into our daily life, okay? And so if you look at the text itself, it talks about, especially like the one that says about happiness in the present life and going to the future. And here they talk about, giving a medicine that's made of butter, molasses, sugar, and ghee. Well, I don't think many of us eat ghee today. So, rather than looking at it just from the text, as we said, as Debbie mentioned, meditation or listening to the Dharma in our daily life can bring us peace in the present as well as in the future. So then going forward, the Buddha then, as he talks about, destroying the various falsities and the sufferings that we have, there's a conversation that he has with a Brahman named Sandarika Varadaja. Okay. And here, this Brahman asked the Buddha if he's heard of this river, the Bahuka River. And in that river, it said that you could cleanse yourself of all your, fetters or your uncleanliness. And in fact, to this day in India, the greatest example of this is the Ganges River, especially in Varanasi. So if you go to Varanasi, Varanasi is seen as the Mecca of the Hindu world. And so it is the goal of all Hindus, at least once in their life, they try to make it to Varanasi and to bathe in the Ganges River. But to be very honest and blunt, I would never, ever bathe in that water. It is very, very dirty. And it's actually a whole microcosm of life within that river, because Varanasi is the place, or it's famous for what they call the ghats. And what they do there is they do cremations right by the river. And then they put the cremated remains in the river, because for Hindus, the most sacred or the best way to go is to be returned to the Ganges River. The Ganges is the mother of all rivers. So you'll find these cremation piers. They're just on the side of the river. Literally, they're in the open, and they have piles of wood. And depending on how wealthy you are, that's how much wood you're able to purchase. And then they do the cremations right there, and then they'll throw the remains into the river. Now, some of the remains, actually, they don't burn it completely. And so you'll actually have unburnt body parts that are put in the river. But down the river, you'll also have predominantly women, because it is part of their culture, but you'll find them doing their laundry in the river. So they're washing their laundry. And then down the river, so right in the center of the Varanasi, where the ghats, there's steps that lead into the river, you'll literally find hundreds of thousands of people coming on a regular basis from throughout not only India, but the world. And they would be cleansing themselves in the river. So within the Hindu culture, this Ganges River is seen to be the most sacred and cleansing as well. When I went in year 2000 with our temple group, at that time it was still called the Buddhist Church of Canada, we did a pilgrimage and we went there. And I washed my hands in the river. That was the closest I was going to get to going into the river. So this Brahman was talking about the cleansing effects of the river. But what the Buddha said was, of course, one can really cleanse themselves by encountering the Dharma. And what he was talking about is, in fact, what the Buddha was leading to was that there are many superstitions that exist, and that we don't believe in superstitions, but the teachings, the Dharma, can lead us to true liberation or to true cleansing. So this was a short dialogue between this Brahman, but he was trying to point out how we don't believe in superstitions. Like the river itself has no actual power, but if you immerse yourself into the teachings, you can actually awaken to wisdom inside. So this is a very important conversation that he had. Now, on another occasion, the Buddha was talking to his disciples, and he was saying basically that unless you get rid of what he called the fetters, discarding the fetters of the mind and loosening the 5 bondages of the mind is very difficult to practice. And this part here is where it gets quite serious in a sense. So if we look at them, and we just look at the 5 fetters, for instance, having doubts in one's teachers and having faith in them. Okay, being unsure about the teachings and not having faith in it. Also, the first one should be having doubts in one's teacher and not having faith in them. Sorry, so I forgot the word "not" in there. Actually, you know what? I am going to share this, put this up on the screen. So for those of you that don't have it printed out there. So we're right here now on the fetters, right? And so the first one should be having doubts in one's teacher and not having faith in them. And then the second one was being unsure about the teachings and not having faith in it. Okay. Having doubts about the Sangha and not having faith in it. Having doubts about learning and not having faith in it. Being irritated by friends and becoming depressed. Okay. So these are what we call 5 fetters. Fetters are, how do you describe fetters? Fetters are something that holds you down, okay? It pulls you back, basically. So these fetters are things that prevent you from going forward. And in here, so this is where it becomes really difficult because it's asking you, or the Buddha is saying basically, you have to trust in the teachings and you have to fully accept the teachings. And I think this is something that becomes very, very, very difficult, especially when we think about the Buddhist cosmology or the way Buddhism looks at time. And it was said, so there are different ages. So for the first 500 years after the Buddha passed away, we call it the right Dharma age. And the reason why we call it the right Dharma age is because the teachings remain very pure. Okay, so you have the Buddha's teachings, you might have either direct disciples or maybe a few generations below, but regardless, the teachings remain quite intact. And you also have a number of people who follow that practice, and most importantly, you also have a number of people that attain enlightenment. So that's for the first 500 years after the Buddha passed away. Then for the next 1,000 years, they call it the semblance Dharma age. And this 1,000-year period is defined that the teachings are still there. In fact, they're written down in recordings. There are fewer people that actually follow the practice in a very earnest sense, and even fewer actually attain what we call this enlightenment. Then finally, for the next 10,000 years, and this is where we're in right now, it's called the last Dharma age, or the declining Dharma age. And what's defined in this period is that, yes, the teachings still exist, but now it's really difficult to practice and next to impossible to attain enlightenment. Okay. So with our daily life, our present life, it's very difficult for us to commit fully to any teaching. Even for us to spend Tuesday night for an hour, hour and a half is very difficult for us to commit on a complete, fully involved basis, right? But what the Buddha is saying here is that unless you commit fully, it's very difficult to follow. And he also then goes on to talk about the 5 bondages. And he says, not being free from greed that begets thirst for earthly things. Okay, I think all of us have this. we want to have a comfortable living. Right now we have the wisteria place that has just been built, and I hear both good things and also complaints. People complain about the food is not good on this occasion, or the door is too heavy to open, or we have all these, we're never completely satisfied. And that's not only the people that live in wisteria, all of us are that way, right? We want to have our comforts, and we have greed associated with that. Not being free from greed in regard to one's body. Okay, so we get attached to our body. I'm sure none of us like to age, having to struggle. And this will come back again a little later on. But the example that the Buddha talks about is that, you know, when you start getting older, it's more and more difficult to concentrate on things. So to listen to something and to stay focused on something, as you get older, it gets more and more difficult, right? So when we're young, we get attached to our looks, and we get attached to the way we want to hope to stay. And that can create a lot of disharmony as well. And this is why in North America, people continue to buy the hair dye to look young. And now they do what do they call it? Botox or whatever. They shoot chemicals into their bodies to try to look young, right? Being bound to greed for material goods. Okay, so this is sort of like the first one, being bound to this greed. Indulging in naps after filling one's stomach with food. Now, I think this one's very good. Let me just see. Do I see anybody sleeping right now? But very appropriate for our present day. I'm sure all of us have done that, have big meals and then just sat down and ended up dozing off, right? Being bound to the desire to be born in heavenly realm by doing pure deeds. Now, this is a very interesting one. He calls this a bondage, right? Sometimes we can get bound to the fact that we become too righteous, in the sense that we think, oh, I'm doing this, and so everybody else should be doing this. This is the good thing to do, and you actually lose sight of the actual goal of what you're trying to do when you become attached to it too much. Okay, so to offset this, the Buddha said to cultivate the 5 powers of aspiration, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And in fact, this is the beginning of what we call the Mahayana Buddhism, or the larger vehicle. The one that's not in here is the dana, which is the selfless giving. But if you add that, then you will in fact become very close to what the Mahayana, or our particular branch of Buddhism, Mahayana. There are 2 major branches of Buddhism. One we call the Theravada, or the way of the elders, and that tends to be much more orthodox, and they follow more of the Eightfold Noble Path. So these 5 powers of aspiration, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, you can also extrapolate to the Eightfold Noble Path. So I also sent you in my email that I sent out before this, there is the Eightfold Noble Path as well. But this is also moving towards what we call the larger vehicle, or the teaching that says all beings together attain enlightenment. Okay, so so then next, on another occasion, the Buddha. The Buddha comes, has the conversation with the Brahmin Janusoni, And this is actually a very interesting, it said it occurred in the Jeta Grove, and the Buddha had this conversation where this Janusoni comes to the Buddha and says, I am destined to die, and there is no one that does not fear death. And so the Buddha is talking, and this is, I think, a conversation that really we have to think about it for a little while. I think it's very important. And the Buddha says that there are those who do not fear death. There are two types of people who must fear, who must encounter, among those who must die. There are those who fear death and those who do not fear death. Okay, so this is a very concrete teaching on how we can examine or see our own mortality. And the Buddha says, those who fear death, and I've listed it out in the sheet here, those who fear death are the ones who do not discard greed in regard to the 5 desires and cannot free themselves from attachment. So the 5 desires are associated with our sense organs, right? So they're the form, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Okay, so very basic desires that we have. And so if you get too attached to it, you fear when you're unable to get those things. And that could create fear. You know, as we get older, all of us are going to encounter these things. Ones who are not able to free their greed from attachment to the physical body, right? If we don't awaken to the reality that as everything changes, that includes our physical body. We can maintain our health to a degree, but ultimately, all of us, our physical body, because it is a physical body, it will age, it will get older, and there will be a time where the physical body will break down, right? That's a reality. And those who have only done evil deeds and not taking refuge in the Dharma. So again, those who just live blindly without truly following the guidance, they will end up suffering in the end or fearing the demise. And finally, those who doubt the right Dharma. So if you're shown or if you're given a true teaching, yet if you don't follow that. Oops, sorry, somebody's in the discussion. That can create fear. Conversely, the Buddha said, those who do not fear death, right? Those free from attachments to 5 desires, those free from attachments to the physical body, those who seek refuge in doing good deeds, and those who take refuge in the Dharma and have no doubts in the right Dharma, then there's nothing to fear. Now, what's important here, okay, is this word fear. Another word for fear, you can put anxiety as another replacement word for fear. Okay? This does not mean that one will not encounter pain or even suffering, but one could lessen the fear that's associated with these things. It is painful to get old when your body doesn't work the way you want to. I've given Dharma talks on, the Japanese word yoisho as we get older and we sit down or get up. That's a very traditional Japanese word, and there's no good English translation for it. But when we say yoisho, it's just an expression when you're exerting yourself, as you get older, Japanese people will often use this term, and it just helps them doing whatever the more difficult physical activity is. Okay. I did try to look it up in the translation. I think the translation I found was yoho, and I don't understand how that doesn't make any sense. But anyways, yes, there is pain associated with getting old. There is suffering that's associated with it. But you can also lessen the fear if you have the right mind frame, if you will, the right thinking, right view of how things are. And then he goes on, and there's a section, and it's the title of it is called "The Brahmin Called Gearhead," and I didn't find the section on his conversation with Gearhead to be that interesting, so I actually skipped that part. But right after that, there's a very interesting part where the Buddha is giving a talk at one of the more famous sites called Vulture's Peak. And he says that there are four truths expounded, or he expounds four truths to these wandering monks. And those are that all living beings are born from ignorance. All objects of the five desires are impermanent, pain-causing and changing. All existence are impermanent, pain-causing and changing. There is no independent I or mine. What the Buddha was trying to get here is that the more we're able to free ourselves from our attachment to that we think is real and true and real, the easier it is for us to accept life as it is. It doesn't mean that you don't appreciate each moment, but it also means you don't get attached to those things, okay? And I think this Far Side cartoon really puts it into perspective of the father talking about how these lower forms of being mark their territories. And he's saying this to his son as he's in this little backyard that's bound by the fence. So in a sense, we do this all the time. We create our own little ego or our own little world. And as long as we're safe in this little area, we feel comfortable. But the true reality is that that's also a falsity, right? And we're beginning to see this very much in our global world right now. We're coming to a point of ecological crisis where they're saying our reliance on fossil fuels and all the things that we've done are creating disharmony, not only for ourselves, but throughout the world. And unfortunately, we're still like this man in the yard, where we're only looking at our own little space. And as long as this is comfortable, then I'm happy. But in the end, this will cause suffering, is what the Buddha says. So awakening to that reality is important. And I've also attached, again, I'm sure many of you have seen this before, the story of the sandcastles. This also is a very good story that outlines the true reality of our existence as these kids build their sandcastles. And I'm not going to read through that today. You can read it on your own. That's more for your reference. So then, so the next one that I highlighted, and I did go through all the examples of that. There's a section afterwards where it's starting to get into it's not the Dhammapada, but there are things in here that are reminiscent or bring about the Dhammapada. And the Buddha is talking about, there are two types of beings, two persons that appear in the world that for the sake of benefit and happiness of all. And he goes on and he talks about there are two types of this or that. And I've just sort of skipped over that part. If you want to ask me questions about it, please feel free to do so, and I will try to discuss it. But in the next section, this section here, it said that the Buddha on another occasion is journeying to the place called the Jatiya Grove of Badia. And there he encounters this person named Uga, who invites him for dinner. And then after the meal, he asks the Buddha, he says, my daughters are about to go off and get married. So please give them some wise advice. And so this passage that I've put in your handout is what it is. And there have been some in the modern times that have looked at this and said that this is making the females more subservient. And it is true. In those days, like the Buddha says, that, you should heed these things, be thankful to my husband's parents who are concerned about our well-being and love us with compassion. They should arise early in the morning and retire late and be ever ready to be able to serve them. And then I shall comfort them with kind words. I shall respect and give offerings to our parents. And this is very important. And to the mendicants, to the holy people who their husbands feel are important. Okay. And then it also says, I shall be understanding of the kind of work my husband is doing, and I shall adapt myself to it and work hard to help him, right? And as to servants, he says, you should learn how to treat them properly. And then also, I shall take care of my husband's earnings and shall not waste them, right? So there's the teaching of the Buddha. I don't know, some of you have seen the little orange book. I'm sure most of you have read Teaching of Buddha. This passage is in that Teaching of Buddha, and I've heard comments by some people from the female gender who have said this seems very antiquated. But what I mentioned to people is that yes, it is antiquated, but if you take out the gender specifics, this is very good advice. So it doesn't have to be the wife, it could be the husband as well, or any partner, right? If you respect your elders and treat them with kindness, right? If you try to support your partner, if you take out the gender part from it, the actual advice is very good advice. Okay, so it could be given to anyone. So it's not necessary in our day and age. It can be male, female, non-binary. It could be any being. And it's fair enough. Things change as we progress. I think I saw Charlene on here before, but she had talked about the fact that I talked about Star Trek. Star Trek has evolved, right? When Star Trek first came on air, Captain Kirk in is it the opening or the ending monologue? They used to say where no man has gone, and now it's where no one has gone. So they've changed from, they've become gender neutral in Star Trek because it's politically correct today, right? So things change. So if you take out the gender specifics, this is good advice. And then the next part too is very interesting because he talks to this General Sinha in Vaishali, and there the general asks the Buddha to give some specific examples of how, or he says that, giving is a good deed. So he will ask the Buddha, how in this present life do I reap benefits from giving, or what causes or what outcomes show that giving is good? And the Buddha says, again, this is very direct and something that you can think about, is that he says, one who gives will be loved by people. And it's true. One who gives is loved by people, right? Good people will follow and serve one who gives. Yeah, the more one gives, the more people tend to gravitate towards them, help them out. One who gives will be honored highly. Again, yes, you'll be recognized, acknowledged. One who gives has no fear, but confidence in going into gatherings of kings, scholars, rich people, and mendicants. So there's no worries that are attached. And one who gives because of their merits will be born into the heavenly realms. This is a benefit in the next life. So he talks about these benefits. So to give is very good. And in fact, in my last Sunday Dharma talk, I talked about the story of the spider thread, and how there was a thief by the name of Kandata. And despite the fact that he did nothing but bad things throughout his life, there was one occasion that he actually saved the life of a spider. And because of this, in his following life, he's actually suffering in the realm of hell. But the Buddha, it's said in the story, sends down this long spider thread that Kandata tries to climb out of hell with. And he's actually doing quite well until he feels tugging from below and sees all the other beings in hell climbing up the same thread. And at that moment, he fears that it's going to cut. So he tells everybody, get off, this is my thread. And at that point, the thread gets cut off above his head. Now, in this, I read a commentary by a Zen monk. And in that commentary, the Zen monk mentions the fact about this story is talking about compassion and how we have to. Well, I'm just gonna actually mute you because there's somebody that's on. Sorry, I'm gonna mute you off because somebody's talking in the back there. Oh, I still hear somebody talking. How can that be? Okay. Okay. So let's see. So this Zen monk talks about the fact that, in fact, this is a story of compassion and how to help others is good. And what's interesting is that this Zen monk talks about the fact, he actually brings in science to it. And he says there are actual studies that have done that show that when we give, dopamine is created in the mind. And so it gives us a sense of well-being as we give. So the more we give, the more dopamine or positive reinforcements are being created through that. And that's what in this passage, the Buddha states, that by giving, we are receiving this kind of benefit. Okay. Let me just, sorry. Continue on here. Where are we? There was sandcastles. Oh, okay. So then, oh yeah. So then the next section, he talks about discarding greed, anger, and ignorance. And the Buddha begins by talking to Ananda. Oh, no. So Ananda is actually talking to an individual, a householder, who comes to and says, you know, whose teaching is the best teaching and who's most peace? And Ananda says to this householder that, of course, the Buddha's teaching is the best. And so the Buddha is talking to his disciples, and he says, first of all, that there are 5 powers, and he calls these powers faith, outward shame, inward shame, effort, and wisdom. And of the 5 powers, he says the wisdom is the most important because all the other ones are inherent in wisdom. Okay, so when we begin to see things as they truly are, then we end up becoming humble over it because we realize how great the teachings are themselves. And so this is what he calls the outward shame, but also inwardly as well. We realize the smallness of our existence compared to the universal Dharma. And so these 5 things will lead to liberation. And then there are 5 things that lead to suffering. And he says lack of faith, lack of outward shame, lack of inward shame, idleness, and ignorance. And he talks about 5 other powers as well. It says faith, endeavor, right thought, concentration, wisdom. Again, wisdom is the most important here. So from these lists, whether it be this one or some of the earlier ones, we begin to see the Eightfold Noble Path, as well as the 6 paramitas or the 6 bodhisattva perfections. I think I forgot to send you the 6 bodhisattva perfections. I will do that subsequently. But you can see where some of when we follow the teachings and we talk about these paths, they're also expressed in this way. And then he comes across and he's talking about the disciples who are living on their own. So when we talk about Buddhism, there are those disciples who go off on their own in the forest and practice by themselves. And he says that for these individuals, there are 5 fears that they may encounter. Living alone, I might be bitten by a snake or scorpion and die. Living alone, I might become ill and even die from food poisoning, cold, or consumption. Living alone, I might be killed by a lion, a tiger, a leopard, or a bear. Living alone, I might encounter some ruffians who may kill me in fits of rage. And living alone, I might be killed by some devil or demon who make the forest their home. So when such fears arise, the Buddha said, one must have determination, basically. Think through it or persevere through it and attain. I must reach what I have not yet reached and must awaken to what I have not yet awakened and be determined to exert more zeal and effort. So he's encouraging them to, in the hardest of times, you must continue on. And when we look at when the Buddha attained enlightenment, it was said he spent 49 days under the Bodhi tree. And during that period, Mara, the head of the underworld, if you will, Mara was the one that was trying to dissuade the Buddha from attaining enlightenment. Mara is the king of all the existence of suffering. And Mara, first of all, sends his young daughters to try to entice the Buddha to go out from this meditation that he was doing. And Mara, when the Buddha tells his daughters, you might be young now, but your true reality is old age and you will wither and become old. And Mara's daughters all become old and withered. Then Mara gets upset and he sends hordes of demons to attack the Buddha, but all their slings and arrows that they sent towards the Buddha turn into flower petals around him. So the Buddha had encountered many of these hardships on his way to enlightenment, and he persevered through those hardships. So that's what he's saying here. Those who practice on their own in the forest, you might have these fears that arise, but what's important is to persevere and continue with your practices. And then he talks about those for all disciples, not just those in the forest, but all disciples may have some other fears that come up. And when they do, think of it in a similar manner. And it's getting to be close to 8:30. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop here tonight, and I'll continue on from here next time. So if you want to look in your book, it's page 424 of your text. And then next week, hopefully, we'll be able to actually get into the Dhammapada, which starts on page 428. As I mentioned, there's so much material in this, we basically went over 10 pages of the text, but the amount of stuff that was in here, I think was well worth spending the time to actually dissect it a little bit more. So I'll continue on from here next week. Does anybody have any comments or questions, or? Did you understand that, or was I going too quickly, or? Understandable, yes?
Yeah.
Rose, you have something you want to say? Share?
Yeah, I do. What keeps coming to my mind as I was reading all of this several times over, and then I highlighted, which is my way. And at first I was afraid to highlight this beautiful book, but I figure it's a good thing, because it brings things to mind. So the one thing I seem to be taking from this is that until you have self-practice and then practice that mirror, looking into the mirror to see what it is that you are, when you're accessing greed and anger and ignorance, only until I have the time and make the time, it becomes a decision, a choice that if I want this, to understand, because I won't. And so I have that faith and the trust in these teachings. It's as soon as right from the beginning, if I was to say, well, I don't know about that. Was the Buddha really clear? Did he understand how women feel? And well, that right away is taking me away from the point. When I read that part again, I thought, yes, it's all about harmony in our homes, and harmony in our lives, harmony in the earth that we're on and part of with our friends. So if I start to want to have disagreement or make a point, just to be right, everything falls apart. And so taking more time to listen. I mean, I spent my life teaching and talking. So it's such a nice thing to be able to, okay, that's suffering. I am causing my own suffering, because now it gives me such an opportunity, and I'm doing exactly what I said I wouldn't do, but to listen. And sometimes to listen to self when I'm practicing, whatever it is, chopping up something in the kitchen, vacuuming, doing something, checking on my cats, whatever it is, on my kids, my husband, all the things that I volunteer with. These are all my practice. And I read this and I think, wow, each sentence is so full and so profound. And yet here I am, this person. And so in a birth death, here I am, little deaths during the day, new births during the day, and it's self-practice. And so hearing you and hearing other people's thoughts, just give the trust, that faith that it's okay, but we have to work at it. It just doesn't come, it's there for the picking, for the choosing, to hold on to. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you.